We have a number of legal stories to talk about today, including the Supreme Court now setting a date, April 25th, to hear arguments on Donald Trump's claim of immunity from prosecution. The former president's trial for subverting the 2020 election has been on hold, giving the justices a chance to weigh in on this. It'll be the last case of the current term in the Supreme Court, April 25th. Now, as jury deliberations continue in the trial of the Rust armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, we're going to talk about that as well. So we have criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool with us right now, and maybe we'll get a little into Fani Willis. So let's see how quickly we can move here, Brian. We have three kind of cases. I think all are important today. April 25th, first of all, on immunity in the Trump case. I'm wondering, we'll put the timeline up. Does that give us time for a trial in September, maybe before the election? What do you think?
Hey, Connell, great to be back with you. I mean, there's a slight chance. I mean, I really believe the U.S. Supreme Court's going to, conclude that Trump does not have immunity from being prosecuted. And then the question then is, how long after that will it take both sides to be prepared for a trial? I think it's going to be a close call. If I'm a betting man, I would say that the case does not get to trial prior to the election. Right.
That's what Mr. Maris was saying the other day. It's just going to be too tight. Some people say, man, maybe late September. But you and Misty seem to think it's probably unlikely. The other case, Fulton County, Georgia, we're wondering whether that gets to trial. But first, you got to work through this idea whether the Fulton County DA Fani Willis or Nathan Wade, a special prosecutor, will be thrown off the case. That continued, that process back and forth today. One of the lawyers on the Trump defendant side of things, Ashley Merchant, making the case further. Let's listen to what she had to say, then come back and talk about where all of this is. This is earlier today.
Our motion, the theory, basically just to sum up the motion, is that essentially he's getting paid all of this money and they're not going through the proper person. I go through it in the motion. I talk about how he didn't file an oath, which is rare. I'm one of those.
Didn't file a what?
He didn't file an oath of office. Yeah. And I'm one of those people that I always, when I first start a case, I always make sure that everything is all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So I always pull that.
Give us the context, Brian, if you can, on what we just heard, but also how you think this ends up.
Yeah, Connell, this is a state Senate investigative committee. Kind of like a parallel would be the U.S., the Senate Judiciary Committee, to give your viewers an example. It's on the state level. They're now investigating Fani Willis. That's a big deal in and of itself, right? I mean, to have the state legislative branch involved. But look, there was some really damaging testimony today that Merchant gave. I mean, one thing she said, Connell, was that Wade, he was the special prosecutor hired by Fani Willis, that he was paid almost $700,000, I think $650,000 at $250 an hour, whereas there were two other lawyers hired by Fani Willis to support Wade as a special prosecutor, and they were paid about $100,000 and less than $150,000. So there's a massive difference between the two on that. And then he was billing in blocks. Why is that important? Because when you're paid by hour, you have to break down the entries. What were you doing at a meeting? How long did that meeting last? You can't just say, oh, I went to a meeting, here's 12 hours.
Right.
So the optics are just horrible in terms of potential fraud.
So do you think, it sounds like you think that, either he and or she are going to be removed here. How do you think it all ends up at the end?
That's a different question.
Right, it's not in that hearing. Right.
Yeah, that's a different question. This state Senate committee doesn't have jurisdiction, Connell, to remove Fani Willis. And then the judge on this case, he's got to rule on whether there's a conflict of interest here and whether she's removed. And if he follows just strictly the law, right, you've got to prove that what Willis did with Wade has jeopardized a fair trial for Trump and the other defendants. And I don't think that burden's been met. But here's the key question. Is there anybody else that can remove Willis from this case? There was a county prosecutorial commission set up last year, Connell, to do just this, to remove DAs if there's any misgivings or misdoings.
Right.
But here's what happened. The state Supreme Court didn't approve the rules. Therefore, that commission cannot remove Willis. So unless this judge removes Fani Willis and her team, there's no other entity that I see that can remove her.
Okay, I want to get a quick thought from you. I know it's a completely different topic, but Alex Capriello, our reporter last hour, was telling us the closing arguments have wrapped up in this Rust trial. The Alec Baldwin movie where the cinematographer was shot and killed. The armorer has been on trial. Now the jury has the case. The jury deliberations, in fact, are underway. Any thoughts of what you've seen at trial and how this ends up ahead of Baldwin himself going on trial later this year?
Yeah, Connell, so I think the best piece of evidence for the prosecution was two things. A videotape they had of Hannah Gutierrez Reed where she was crying and she said, "I'm a failure." That was a critical piece of evidence. And then Dave Halls, he was the assistant producer. He got up and testified, hey, Gutierrez Reed gave the gun directly to Alec Baldwin. That was a critical piece of evidence as well because she's the last one to have it. And I think the best piece of evidence on the defense side was the OSHA witness. They had an OSHA person come in from New Mexico saying, hey, look, basically this set was a train wreck, and that they actually concluded that the lack of safety measures in place on the set contributed to Helena Hutchins being killed. That said, though, I think the catastrophic mistake was not bringing Hannah Gutierrez to the stand to testify about the drugs, that she wasn't impaired, that she did check the gun. And I think that by not doing that, I think at best the defense gets a hung jury, and there's more than a likely chance that she gets convicted.
Right, interesting. You think she should have taken the stand. All right, Brian, thank you as always. Brian Claypool there. Our panel's coming up next, just learning about